Good evening, everybody. My name is Brian Berube, and I am a fourth year student here at Southern New Hampshire University. And I am here to talk to you about the important topic of discrimination of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered law enforcement officers in the workforce. I chose this topic because many friends that I know have faced or will face in the future issues with discrimination in the law enforcement community based on their sexual orientation. I also wanted to bring forth ways that we can improve or are improving on becoming a more diverse and open law enforcement community. Before we get started and discuss issues of discrimination in the law enforcement community, we must first talk about the origins of discrimination. We must know where discrimination comes from before we can understand its place within the law enforcement community. Origins of discrimination. We must note that homosexuality has been around for many years, but oppression is fairly new. And that came from modern social practices of what is normal. Capitalism created the idea of the family and what is normal. A male and female family was normal, and that's what society considered as normal. And that's what built upon discrimination of homosexuals. We must also note that different classes, different races, and gender all have an impact on discrimination. How people experience situations depend on factors such as geographical locations, work, or sexuality. Different parts of the country or different parts of the world discriminate against different races or people of different sexual orientation because that is the way that they were brought up. Which brings us to social circles. How we were raised from childhood to adulthood, family, friends, and coworkers all assist us on forming opinions or social factors. If we grow up in a social circle where we don't know anybody that is homosexual or a transgendered person, we tend to form opinions based on what we know. And without proper education, we're more likely to discriminate on what we don't know. So let's talk about the influences of homosexuality. Now, views on homosexuality come from anything such as schools, religious institutions, and even, like I said before, the social circles. A perfect example is from the family that I grew up in. I grew up in a primarily Catholic household and I went to Catholic schools. And because of that, I was always told that homosexuality was a sin in school, Catholic school, and in religious institutions. So I formed the opinion that homosexuality was a sin. However, I grew up also in a family where my mother's brother was homosexual. And I think because of this, I had conflicting information growing up. However, I will say this, even if the school or the church or social circles all had different opinions, I took it to myself to focus on education and learning about different cultures and sexual orientations and being openly diverse. And because of that education, I was able to jump out of the social circles or opinions of schools or religious institutions and form my own opinion on homosexuality. And that really helped me to open my eyes to being accepting of more individuals than I would have if I stayed within that social circle. It's important to note, like I said before, that in the late 19th century, the capitalist society created the wall between a normal family and a way to live outside that. It wasn't like that before, and because of that society creating that wall, that caused discrimination. However, it's important to note that within the past couple years, or modern society, or today's society, has brought forth issues of gay marriage, transgender rights, and equal women's rights. Prior elections and current elections bring these issues forth, and whether somebody is against gay marriage or for gay marriage, or against transgender rights or for transgender rights, or even against equal pay for women or for equal pay for women, the issues are being discussed on a political platform. And because of that, we've made many historic changes. Gay marriage is now the law of the land, and that wouldn't be the case if we weren't having open discussions, and if politicians didn't form opinions. So we must note that is important. Whether you agree or you disagree with issues, it's crucial that the issues be discussed if we want to see changes that prevent discrimination. John F. Kennedy once said that too often we enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. And I think that quote is crucial because too often we're comfortable with our social circle or opinions of our social circle, and too often we don't step outside our comfort zone, and we don't focus on educating ourselves of other cultures and people of other sexual orientations, and that's how we learn. So I think that quote is important. Now let's move on to what causes discrimination in law enforcement. Well, first of all, it's important to note that we fear what is different from us, what we don't know. However, it's important to educate ourselves so we do know. A CBS News headline stated that gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender survey found that nearly 4 in 10 felt rejected by family members or friends. So, how are law enforcement officers supposed to feel comfortable with coworkers if they feel rejected by family or friends? That's almost half of gay, lesbian, transgender, or bisexual that do not feel comfortable with a family member. And if you can't feel comfortable with a family member, how are you supposed to come out at work? It's important to note that people, the media, lack of education, religion, or social circles have formed opinions that filter hate towards groups they do not consider normal. And that is what causes discrimination within the law enforcement community because the officer has not dealt with different diverse groups. Now, I'd like to talk about some of the struggles that law enforcement face on a daily basis. 40% of the reported cases of discrimination against law enforcement and corrections department personnel included hate speeches, death threats, violence, homophobic remarks, and firing. How can law enforcement be a role model for the community without being accepting to coworkers? Issues like hate speeches, death threats, violence, remarks, and even up to firing. I don't know about you, but I would not feel comfortable going to work if I face these daily struggles. That added stress only adds to the ability for a law enforcement officer to do their daily job. If they don't feel comfortable at work, it is going to affect their performance. And in this case, their performance is to protect us as citizens. So we really can't feel protected if they don't feel safe in the environment that they're working in. Next, we should talk about some of the roles and responsibilities of law enforcement administration and officers as well. Law enforcement communities must form a culture where officers are comfortable and not being afraid of their sexuality. Here in Massachusetts, Massachusetts State Police in general have created an environment where officers can feel comfortable. There are many officers that are gay and lesbian, and they participate in gay pride events, and they participate in um, different events that showcase that the police here are open to a diverse community, and that's important. Many law enforcement officers, however, do come from a military background, which until recently was don't ask, don't tell. So, because they were trained in this military background to not talk about their sexuality, this has caused conflict in the law enforcement community. Law enforcement officers must serve all of the community, and all of the community includes different religions, different sexual orientations, different races. And because of that, officers can't discriminate and can't have issues with each other because it will cause conflict in working with the general public. We've seen these issues in the past year with racial divide between law enforcement officers and African Americans. Serve and protect doesn't just cover straight people, but the entire community. And that's important. We must know that if an officer is being discriminated against for being gay or lesbian or transgender, it's more than likely that the officer that is discriminating against that gay or lesbian police officer might be discriminating members of the community. And that's crucial because if they're discriminating against members of the community, that's a problem with overall job performance because it is the job and responsibility of the law enforcement officer to protect everybody. So let's talk a little bit about creating a diverse workforce. Well, let's first give you an example. There are many groups out there that do have a role in supporting gay, lesbian, transgender, or bisexual officers. A perfect example is the Gay Officers Action League, or GOAL, which was designed to focus on supporting gay and lesbian officers. So they have somebody to come to help them overcome issues that they face within the law enforcement community. But not only issues, but also to have them come together and be one in the community and feel comfortable being openly gay, and it's just a general support group. And we know that this group has had a positive impact on the law enforcement community because the group has been around for 25 years. So, for 25 years, law enforcement officers have had this community that they can count on that will help them get through issues that they may face within the law enforcement position. It's also important to note that support from government officials, the public, and the overall community will help to make changes happen that protect these officers from discrimination in the workforce. If we don't have politicians and we don't have the public on the side of gay, lesbian, transgender, or bisexual officers, then we won't see changes that make it easier for these officers to perform their job within the workforce. It's also important to note that administration or leaders need to attract the best talent that does foster a diverse workforce. It's not just up to administration to find the most qualified officer. They must find somebody that encompasses education that focuses on diversity, because doing the job now requires somebody that is diverse. You are working with the general public, and the general public has different sexual orientations, different religions, different beliefs. Officers must protect the entire public. So it is very important for leaders to find people that are open to diversity. It's also important to note that success depends on the officer's interaction with the community overall. If an officer has a good relationship with the community, then they're more likely to do well in the workforce. Now, we talked a lot about officers being open to diversity, open to change, and leaders and administration hiring the best talent, but it's also up to leaders and administration of law enforcement to enforce consequences when gay, lesbian, or transgendered, bisexual are being discriminated against. Officers must face consequences for their actions, and that can include anything up into termination in the event of harassment. Most companies or corporations have a zero tolerance policy, and it's up to police union and management to agree on a zero tolerance policy. In today's society, it's not acceptable. Law enforcement agencies must also use media to promote the agency as being diverse and open to assist all members of the community. For example, this month, June, is Gay Pride Month, and it's important for departments to recognize Gay Pride Month and to celebrate diversity just like any other company. Participating in gay pride parades or events promote diversity within the workforce and allow officers to feel comfortable in coming out or discussing their sexuality. And that is an important role in creating workforce diversity. But in addition, social media is also important because social media is a tool that can be used to also show that law enforcement is diverse. During Gay Pride Month, a law enforcement agency may raise a gay pride flag, and that shows, as a whole, the community is open to diversity. It's also important that training is done annually to promote diversity. If administration does not train a diverse workforce and does not have an open door policy and a zero tolerance policy, then you are opening doors that could lead to discrimination. So it is important to review training materials annually and make sure officers understand that there won't be any tolerance for discrimination or harassment, and that anything that does happen will be taken seriously. Now, let's talk about different ways to help law enforcement officers that may face discrimination or that may have faced discrimination or that may feel uncomfortable in the workforce. I believe that each agency should have a group that deals with support and a lifeline for all officers to discuss LGBT issues in the workforce. Different corporations have an employee assistance program. An employee assistance program is vital within the law enforcement community, so officers feel like they do have someone to talk to. Some departments have a 24-hour a day crisis line that is available if officers do face discrimination, harassment, depression, if they've dealt with issues such as something that may affect them overall mentally. Some departments have peer officers that they can talk to. Some departments have outside vendors that officers can speak to. But either way, it's covering the bases that officers have somebody to reach out to if they don't necessarily have a way to reach out to the Gay Officers Action League or another group. Another crucial piece or a an idea to have improvements within the law enforcement community is holding workshops or trainings or programs that allow others that may not be gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgendered to understand all of the workforce. If we have these workshops, we are educating the law enforcement industry on what these officers might be facing on a daily basis. And part of eliminating discrimination is education. It's also important to note that administration needs to be fully trained to handle any harassment cases promptly. If we don't handle the issue at hand right away, the door opens to future discrimination. Discipline is a must, and if somebody does violate policies set forth by the law enforcement community, there will be consequences. Now, I wanted to end the presentation with some facts on discrimination via the UCA Williams Institute. Um, some of the discrimination against LGBT law enforcement officers included severe verbal harassment. Some included sexual harassment, like I talked about before, death threats, slurs, indecent exposure, inappropriate touching. Some of these reports even included physical harassment, violence. Some of them included officers being slammed into concrete walls, attacked with chairs, and there's also repeated reports of officers being refused backup, which is crazy because that's placing personal safety in danger to these LGBT officers, putting the community at risk, the officer at risk, and potentially other officers in the surrounding areas. It's important to note, too, that over two-thirds of LGBT law enforcement officers in a 2009 study reported hearing homophobic comments on the job, and over half reported being treated like an outsider by their colleagues. In addition to that, a recent survey of 60 members of TCOPS, which is a organization for transgendered law enforcement officers, found that over 90% reported negative experiences with their departments. And lastly, a survey on non LGBT officers also documented high rates of discriminatory attitudes. 50% would have difficulty working with a lesbian officer. So that concludes my presentation on discrimination that LGBT officers face on a daily basis. And I hope you take this presentation to friends, family, to other law enforcement officers, and let them know the importance of being diverse, and let them know the importance of education, training, and the overall impact that um, law enforcement officers have on the community on a daily basis. I think it's the importance of us as a community to make sure we do have a diverse law enforcement um, community, because with that community and with the education, overall, we will be safer. If officers feel comfortable in the job and they feel comfortable with other law enforcement officers, that is less stress on their shoulders, and they are more likely to perform in a manner that will only help us all. So I hope you guys enjoyed my presentation and have a better understanding of the issues that law enforcement officers face on a daily basis, that are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgendered. Thank you. Have a great day.